Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. After a couple of pretty intense weeks where we had news both from political sphere around Ukraine and also in the military aspects where Ukraine secured one of the biggest victories in 2025 by cutting off any Russian attacks around Kupiansk and securing this whole area, Ukraine is now in a relatively stable position despite the fact there are some distractions. So we're going to cover those both in political and military spheres, and most importantly, we're going to cover the recent strike that changed the war forever, specifically strikes against the Russian submarine inside of a supposedly safe harbor. Yet now it is not as safe. So let's cover all of these news and more in today's Ukraine Daily News Show. And also people asked about the jumper for the Christmas. This is not just a simple jumper, it's a HIMARS jumper. So let's begin. The absolutely fantastic footage came from Ukrainians as they showed that suddenly there was an explosion in the Russian Novorossiysk harbor. The harbor that Russia used as essentially a safe point far away from very, very dangerous Crimea that Ukrainians have already been circling around like vultures with their drones and destroying all of the Russian sea vessels and multiplying the Russian Black Sea fleet by zero. Yet Novorossiysk was somewhat safe with a lot of the anti-drone protection systems, a lot of the helicopters patrolling, and being relatively far from Ukrainian-controlled territory. But now, suddenly, with the video appearing, it turns out Novorossiysk is not as safe anymore whatsoever for the remains of the Russian fleet. Ukrainian underwater drone, very nicely named Sea Baby, which is a play on words from Sea Baby, the previous surface vessel drone, and baby here being the play on words from the last name of the commander of the Ukrainian SBU, the security forces, being Maluk, which could be directly translated as a baby. Yes, so it is direct reference to the main commander-in-chief for the Ukrainian security forces. On the footage, we saw the area where Russian sea fleet was stationed in Novorossiysk, and specifically we saw a little bit of details of one of the Russian submarines stationed in the harbor. And that is a submarine that has been used to launch caliber cruise missiles towards Ukraine. It's an active submarine, and arguably, people are now claiming that it has been taken out. At least Ukrainians are stating that this submarine is not operational anymore. Now, at first, Russian disinformation and coping campaign replied stating that no, there was actually no submarine hit, that actually it was a drone that just hit a pier next to the submarine. But in reality, very slowly but surely, the story started changing, even in the Russian narratives, stating that, yeah, you know, there is a little bit of damage for that submarine, which obviously, as we know, because the Russian lips are moving, most likely they are completely lying. In any case, this is a turning point not by the fact of what was hit, but how it was hit. An underwater drone going all the way up from Ukraine. I don't know how, whether it was delivered by air or by sea or how else it was able to get there, was able to move underwater to reach this designated location and strike the target inside of the safe harbor of Russia. So this means that Russia doesn't have any more safe harbors in the Black Sea for now. But more importantly, this could potentially also be danger for all of the other Russian submarines in other places across the globe, depending on how these drones operate, how they're navigated. And this is a big question, and I'm pretty sure Russians right now are in full panic mode, which can only warm my heart. We have some additional news coming from Kupiansk direction, where Russians were pushed out. The reports are that Russians are in full, again, cope mode. And instead of sending in drones with resources to the troops that are encircled in Kupiansk, they're instead sending in drones with flags to get the footage from Kupiansk that is supposed to show propaganda that no, Russians are still in control of that territory and to fight the Ukrainian narratives. Hilarious. But more importantly, this is once again underscoring to us that the main effort of Russian campaign is the propaganda narratives and what they can show on the image and what they can show to people that are willing to believe their narratives. Watch my last video on the Frontline updates where we specifically go around this for the Russian goals, what they can and cannot achieve. But more importantly, we also hear about additional pushes from Ukrainians on the Kupiansk direction. And actually for the Frontline update, we will have some positive news, as the reports are that Russians, at least the drone operators, were pushed out from the west bank of the river, from the bridgehead, all the way back to the east. Ukraine is continuing their campaign against the Russian oil facilities and other valuable targets. I don't cover the fuel facilities that much anymore, mostly because Russia was able to somewhat stabilize. They're buying a lot of fuel right now, and they're able to repair some facilities. So right now we're in this limbo where Russia has found a way to more or less cope with the damages. It is still costing them a lot. It's just not something that is, I guess, as exciting for a lot of people to hear, yet it's always impressive from time to time to see videos on the explosions. What is much more relevant is always to remind that Ukrainians are also hunting the important targets in Crimea. Crimea is still a graveyard for Russian high-tech equipment, specifically radar installations, and this is where Russian radar installations go to die. And just recently, we had another confirmation from the Ukrainian main intelligence directorate that they took out additional radar installations inside of Crimea. More than that, out of notable hits is this hit in Orsk, or some people like to call it Orsk, I know why, in Orenburg region of Russia, where the local mechanical plant got on fire. And this is important because this mechanical plant is actually main Russia's artillery shell producer. It supplies almost half of the shells that are Russian-produced shells to the Russian forces. I know artillery has not been in the news as of lately because Russia changed a lot of tactics, but artillery still plays its role on the front line, so taking out key factories like this is definitely an important achievement. A very important polling happened in the Ukrainian society. I know a lot of you here are worried about Ukraine, whether Ukraine will be pressured, and I explained it many times that President Zelensky is a servant of Ukrainian people. He cannot do anything that will not be accepted by the Ukrainian people. And that's why opinions of the people matter the most. So to kind of dismiss all of the different nonsense about the fact that Zelensky is unpopular or that Ukrainians are already ready to give up and everything, let's look at these latest polls and see what information can we get. So the first chart is what are your opinions on ending the war? So, and here it is in Ukrainian, so I'll be translating. So here we see the European plan to end the war. And generally speaking, Ukrainians would be willing to end the war with the European plan proposed. However, we can see that an absolute majority are not ready to accept the Russian plan to end the war, which is the chart to the right. So ending the war, Ukrainians are ready to end the war. They potentially are willing to end the war, but on the terms that is acceptable to them, not anything that Russia will be putting down their throats. Then there's another chart about the expectations. What are the overview of how Ukrainians are seeing this war ending? And we see that it's only a relatively small number of people that are expecting that the war will end around the end of 2025, start of 2026. A majority of people are expecting that the war will go on for a year, 2 years or more. This is also important for us to understand that Ukrainians are more accepting in their mind that mentally this war can be dragging on for a certain time. Then there is a very interesting chart which is asking the question, how long will you be willing to tolerate this war? So, and the lower part of the chart is the gray one, it says it's hard to tell. The orange is couple of months, and then the light blue is like 1 year. So this lower part, you can say that this is up to a year where people mentally are willing to tolerate the war, and they're close to the breaking point, so to say. Yet you can see that absolute majority is still stating that it's going to be as long as it's necessary. Then there is the question with regards to trust. Here you can see the 2025 versus 2024. So the first one is the European Union. The European Union is generally favorable, with 49% favoring and believing in trusting the European Union. US has pretty plummeted from 41% in 2024 to just 21% now. And NATO has also plummeted from 43% to 34%. A very important chart over here that shows basically the blame game. Here is when there is an electricity blackout, who are Ukrainians blaming? This is an indicative question that shows us like who are more likely to be blamed by the population in Ukraine. So unfortunately, about a third of population, like 29%, are stating that it is the Ukrainian government fault for not providing enough security to the facilities and not doing more. But we still see that absolute majority, 57%, are stating that it's Russia to blame, so the blame is on Russia, and also 8% are blaming the allies for not supplying enough help to Ukraine. Again, this is just indicative who are Ukrainians blaming for their tough time. Then the major question with regards to how is the trust to President Zelensky. And as you can see, it is all fine. So majority of people in blue, they trust President Zelensky. Even after the recent corruption scandals and everything during this year, you can see that generally speaking, President Zelensky have not garnered major negative will, and in generally people are still very favorable to him. And after the recent polling, we even see a little bit like 1% increase and 2-3% decrease in trust towards Zelensky. So it's overall good news. There is no erosion of trust to the president. And finally, the chart that talks about the corruption inside Ukraine and how it is perceived. A lot of the Western media have been painting image that Ukrainian society is now in disarray because of the corruption scandal. Yet now we have finally data, and we see that overall Ukrainians trust their government and government institutions to fight corruption more, because from 2024 towards the end of 2025, we saw a significant increase in trust for Ukraine to fight corruption. And specifically, you can see that after the recent arrest warrants, after the recent actions by the anti-corruption agency in Ukrainian society, distrust fell down quite significantly. So Ukrainians are looking at the news at Ukraine fighting corruptions and are saying, good job. So everything that we were telling you about on this channel. A new cell of Russian agents have been uncovered in Austria. In Austria, authorities uncovered a pro-Russian agent network linked to the Federal Security Services of Russian Federation that run a disinformation campaign while posting as Ukrainian Nazis. The Austrian magazine Profil reported this, citing the finding of journalistic investigation. According to the report, the operation was not limited to Austria but also targeted other states. The network was coordinated by Jan Marsalek, an Austrian citizen and former top executive at Wirecard, who disappeared after the company's collapse, and accounting investigators have been cooperating with Russian intelligence services for a long time. In this way, the operation aimed to discredit Ukraine, reinforcing Russian propaganda narratives, and shape the false perception within European society about the spread of Ukrainian neo-Nazism. Once again, guys, everyone that has ever told you that about Ukraine, Nazis, and everything, it is all Russian propaganda. If you still have doubts, you are still living in the Russian propaganda narratives. I am glad that we're finally fighting these narratives in Europe, and we're discovering the actual agents that are operating. And remember, for every single one discovered, there's going to be at least 1,000 undiscovered agents that Russia is paying to propagate these narratives. Let's touch upon the negotiations. I explained many times that right now it is more of a political circus for one reason and one reason only. It is because Russia will accept nothing. Right now, the dance is between President Zelensky, Europe, and United States. It has nothing to do with ending the war. There's never going to be a ceasefire signed by Russia because Russia is willing only the capitulation of Ukraine. They came out with statements just recently that they would like to capture all of the Donbass, and this will be achieved by any means. But also they want to capture Novorossiysk, which is basically the whole southern part of Ukraine, including Odessa region, where Russia didn't even set foot in yet. So Russia is not giving up any of their goals. They're not going to sign any deals. So all of these negotiations is more of a political theater one way or another. And Ukraine will never agree to bad deal. So the only thing that is actually bringing the end of the war closer is the support for Ukraine that is being supplied by its allies and by us. I absolutely love this community, guys. Thank you so much for supporting Ukraine and Ukrainian armed forces. Our campaign is doing very strong. We're over 86,000 euros by this point in support for Ukraine. My hope is we're going to get past the 100,000 before the New Year's. So let's try to do more for Ukraine. Let's get more of the drones and other equipment to Ukrainian armed forces. So support the fundraiser in the description below. And remember, if you're in the United States, you can always buy the Art Wine, sparkling wine for Ukraine, where they will be sending parts of the proceeds to the fundraiser. It's a win-win-win deal. The links are below. Polish defense minister announces transfer of 6 to 8 MiG-29 jets to Ukraine. Warsaw plans to transfer 6 to 8 MiG-29 fighter jets to Kyiv that are set to be withdrawn from service in the Polish armed forces by the end of the year. Poland has been rearming significantly, and that allowed it to send a lot of their freed equipment to Ukraine. There's been a little bit of a delay of different things to be delivered, especially after the president of Poland that was chosen was initially presented as being more skeptical towards Ukraine. However, we see over time I don't want to say warmed up, but I think Ukraine was able to find some kind of a agreement with him and some of the representatives of his party, and especially fight some of the Russian propaganda narratives in the Polish society. So now, for example, there is going to be a meeting with the Polish president as well. And my hopes are that Poland will come back as a greatest supporter of Ukraine. I truly believe that Poland and strong Poland and independent and supporting Ukraine, Poland is the main factor of our security in Europe, period. We see that in Europe we're lacking a lot of decisive action, and Poland has been the decisive action that we needed so far in Europe. People shared this news and stating, wow, Georgie, look, Ukraine has a new ballistic missiles. And guys, this is a little bit of a play on words. So Sapsan missile is basically the also known as Krim-2 missile. And that missile was supposed to be in Ukrainian armed forces already a couple of years ago, and it's still not there. Ukraine has this missile in very low numbers. There's a lot of issues with production of this missile and development of this missile. So as much as we need to celebrate that Ukraine is having this new weapon, it's not as a hype as some people present it to be. Thank you so very much for watching this video. Support Ukraine, trust in Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Slava Ukraini. And I will see you next time.